Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here. Welcome to episode 300 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. Kevin Robertson is back on the show again today as part of my latest mini-series on hunting in Africa. In this episode, Kevin and I talk about some of the so-called classic 40 caliber Africa hunting cartridges. We cover the pros, cons, and recommended uses for almost everything from the 450-400 all the way up to the 470 Nitro Express in this episode. That also includes some more obscure offerings like the 500 416 and the 416 Taylor, as well as some old standbys like the 416 Rigby, the 458 Win Mag, etc. Now, before we get started, I have a couple of admin notes for you that you're going to want to make sure that you pay attention to. Now, first, this is episode 300. I'm not going to have a special celebration for this particular episode, but I am pleased to inform you that I will be having a very big, very special celebration for my upcoming 5-year podcast anniversary in May of 2024. More details are forthcoming in the next few weeks, but I will just let you know that I am partnering with some amazing sponsors who are all generously donating some incredible prizes to podcast listeners as part of the 5-year anniversary celebration. Stay tuned for more updates via the podcast and via email. To that end, make sure you are on my email list so you'll get first news about this big giveaway and how to enter in it when I announce it. So to join my email list, click the link in the show notes or go to huntingguns101.com. Sign up there to get my free ebook on the best hunting cartridges. You'll get my free ebook when you do that, plus you'll also start to receive the emails I send out every weekday. These are entertaining and informative emails about hunting, shooting, ballistics, Africa, things like that. I get feedback all the time from people telling me how much they look forward to hearing from me every day. So make sure you are getting them too by going to huntingguns101.com and by signing up there. And finally, I want to plug Kevin's books. The Perfect Shot was a revolutionary book when Kevin first published it back in the late 1990s. It is still an incredibly useful resource, especially the updated edition that is currently in print. If you have an upcoming hunt in Africa, or if you're just dreaming about hunting in Africa, or if you just find this stuff interesting, even if you may never hunt in Africa in your life, trust me, you need to get this book. Carefully study what he has to say. You're going to learn a lot from it, and you're also going to really enjoy reading it. You'll learn all about hunting some of the most popular and iconic species of game in Africa, like buffalo, leopard, lion, kudu, impala, zebra, wildebeest, things like that. Go to thebiggamehuntingblog.com/Kevin to learn more about these books, where you can purchase a copy, and you can also help support Kevin and the Big Game Hunting Podcast in the process. thebiggamehuntingblog.com/Kevin, or click the link in the show notes. Okay, let's get started talking to Kevin about these 40 caliber African hunting cartridges. All right, well, Kevin, wonderful talking to you again, as always. It was great seeing you in person again at the SCI show in Nashville, and I've had people asking to get you back on the show, and the caliber comparisons and whatnot are always very popular, so I figured we'd do one tonight together and see how it goes on 40 caliber Safari cartridges, and we'll see how it goes, and if it goes great, maybe we'll do another one in the future.
Fine with me. Let's get cracking.
All right. Well, we'll start with the old 450-400 Nitro Express. Developed 1902, shoots a 411 caliber, 400 grain bullet. Great sectional density, .338, 2100-ish feet per second. So you're getting 3900-ish foot-pounds of energy. Rimmed cartridge, very popular in double rifles and in single-shot rifles. In fact, it seems like, for me, just anecdotally, it seems like the 470 Nitro is probably the most popular in doubles, and the 450-400 is probably number 2. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Yeah. Real favorite cartridge of John Taylor. He loved double rifles. He really loved this cartridge. I know Heim and Krieghoff make rifles for him now today, but I think the only company that makes factory ammo is Hornady. They make 400 grain DGS and DGX bonded bullets for it, and then But luckily you can get a lot of components for it from Barnes. Let's see who else might make them. I think that's actually really. Sorry, go ahead.
Norfolk also makes 411 bullets.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. And I think Woodley does as well.
Yes, definitely Woodley. Yeah.
Yeah. You have any comments on the 450-400?
It's just such a good cartridge that I've never heard bad words said about it in 40 years. It just works. When I took my PH license way back in the early 1990s, I mean, one of the guys on the course had a Belgian 450-400. It was a Le Cordy, I think, and was just a fantastic rifle. Just, it just worked. You did manageable recoil, lots of penetration. Just one of those cartridges that punches well above its weight. And it's probably the ideal cartridge for a first-time double owner because it's manageable recoil-wise, and then it just does everything that it needs to do with recoil that fits in below the 50 foot-pounds of recoil, which I believe is the maximum that first-time or relatively new, dangerous big bore rifle users can tolerate. So it's just a fantastic cartridge that's pretty underrated, but it just gets the job done.
Yeah, definitely, especially considering those very moderate ballistics of it. In your book, Africa's Most Dangerous, in your cartridge table, you list with an 11-pound rifle, 44 foot-pounds of free recoil energy with that 400-grain bullet at 2,150 feet per second. So you're a little bit more recoil than what you're getting out of a hot 375 loading, but with a lot, with a bigger bullet, much more powerful cartridge, that sort of thing. So yeah, a lot to like about it, and I understand why so many people like it. It was interesting. I was reading, just kind of flipping through African rifles and cartridges the other day when I was preparing for this, and John Taylor was just going on and on and on about how much he loved the 450-400, and he was saying it was interesting because he had never heard of anybody having any problems with it, unlike, we'll talk about it here in a second, the 404 Jeffrey, how people, it seemed like they occasionally did have penetration problems with it, especially a long time ago with that old Kynoch ammo. But I guess maybe it was just that combination of just a much higher sectional density or whatever the deal was with it. But we'll move on to the 404 Jeffrey, and we can talk a little bit about that now. Came out a couple years later, depending on who you talk to. 1905, 1910 was when it came out. This is a bolt action rifle, designed for use in bolt actions, very similar ballistically to the 450-400. But for some reason, Jeffrey decided to load a .423 caliber bullet in it, 400-grain bullet, 319 sectional density, so still high, but not nearly as good as the 450-400. Also about 2,150 feet per second, so you're also, right around 4,000 foot-pounds of energy. So you're getting basically the performance of the 450-400, but in a much cheaper magazine rifle. And as you and I have talked about extensively, very, very popular rifle with a lot of the game departments in Africa, to include a lot of use with hunters and whatnot. You have any personal experiences or thoughts on the 404?
I just love it as well. My only concern about the 404 is I believe the sectional density at .319 should be a bit better. And I'm sure that was a contributing factor to the sometimes detrimental comments on big bull elephants with their head up, the bullet sometimes didn't reach the brain. Probably due to Kynoch ammunition not reaching its advertised velocity, but I also think that slightly lower sectional density and the shape of the old Kynoch bullets probably had some influencing factor in not getting as much penetration as was possible. But I have a game ranger friend in the Kruger National Park whose everyday carry rifle is a 404 Jeffries, and he loads 450-grain bullets, and he says, and he shoots those at 2,150 feet per second, and he says that just gives them enough penetration to do anything, to take killing shots at elephants from any angle. I mean, sometimes they have to shoot hippos and euthanize badly wounded rhinos as the poachers are wounded and stuff like that. And he says that just works absolutely fantastic. And that just extra 50 grains, pushing that bullet from 400 to 450 grains and keeping it almost at the original 404 Jeffrey's velocity of 2,150 feet per second. He says that does everything he needs, and he doesn't need any more penetration than that. So just a fantastic cartridge, and also fits within that less than 50 foot-pounds of recoil. So, and that was the reason why the 404 was I'm sure it was one of the contributing reasons why the 404 was the standard issue of all the game departments in British colonial Africa, was because it was suitable enough to take people that were relatively unskilled in shooting big bore rifles and train them up to be very competent game protection officers. So, yeah, as we said before, it's the cartridge that did all the work in Africa, while the 416 Rigby got all the glory. So it's just a fantastic, absolutely fantastic cartridge.
It's interesting how things like that work out, and how certain cartridges really just seem to catch fire in certain areas like that. And the 404 Jeffrey is one of those. Going back to the occasional problems you would hear with penetration, you've talked on the podcast before about how your experiences with Kynoch ammunition, it was, when you actually measured it, it was maybe 150 feet per second slower than what they advertised. Is that about right?
That's about right. Every Kynoch ammunition, different type of dioxide, was definitely about that much less than it was supposed to be doing. And
so you think that, so if it's across the board, the 450-400 was having that problem, but so was the 404 Jeffrey, and you think that the 450-400 did not get that reputation because even though it was going slower, the sectional density, the additional sectional density of those bullets kind of made up for it a little bit, and it still penetrated pretty well even at that slower velocity?
I think so. I've always said before, sectional density, I believe, is an incredibly important statistic for any cartridge. And I know when I was using my 9.3 by 62, when I just increased it from 286 to 300 grain, which is only 14 grains difference. I mean, that 14 grains made a huge difference to the thermal performance, I believe. So even small differences in actual bullet weight have significant influences in sectional density, which I think really make a huge difference. Well, that's my experience anyway.
And so you think with modern ammunition, that is, at least, if it is not necessarily meeting the specified standards, it's at least coming a lot closer than the old Kynoch stuff was, and you're using a better designed bullet than those old Kynoch round nose solids. It seems like these complaints that people used to have about the 404 have kind of gone by the wayside.
Oh, very much so. And I see even modern ammunition now, they're listing it at a 400 grain bullet at doing 2,300 feet per second, which is, I mean, that's almost 416 Rigby or 416 Remington ballistics, So, but definitely for better penetration. Now, if you want to increase momentum, you increase bullet rate, you don't increase velocity. So those game rangers that need to take these backing shots or awkward angle shots, they find by increasing the bullet weight and shooting it at that reasonably sedate velocity of 250 gives them all the penetration that they need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely see that. You mentioned modern ammo doing 2,300 feet per second. So Hornady is the only company I know of that makes factory loads for the 404 now. That's what they advertise it at. 400 grain bullet, 2,300 feet per second. So you're getting darn near 4,700 foot-pounds of muzzle energy out of it. Barnes makes component bullets. I know Woodley probably does too. So does North Fork. But that seems to be the problem with the 404 and the 450-400 these days, is just a lack of ammo and lack of rifle choices, especially compared to a couple of these other cartridges we'll talk about later.
I also think, I don't know, if factory ammo is doing 2,300 feet per second, you probably find that that's pushing the 404 into over the 50 foot-pounds of recoil mark. I would need to crunch the numbers on that. I'm not sure what sort of powder load they would be using, but I would, but it just works. And as long as your rifle is heavy enough, you probably need to get that rifle to weigh 11 pounds to make it, less than 50 foot-pounds of recoil. But I'm sure that's a very effective combination.
Yeah, so in your book here, you list a load at 2,300 feet per second, 10-pound rifle. You got 53 foot-pounds of energy. So, yeah, you bump it up to 10.5 or 11, and it gets you back down to where you need to be.
Yeah.
This is one we haven't talked about previously, the 10.75 by 68 millimeter Mauser. Very interesting cartridge, design 1920s, German cartridge, .424 caliber bullet. Standard load, 347 grain bullet at 2,200 feet per second. And so people kind of thinking about this, doing the math in their head, like that doesn't add up. Well, you're right. It's a 276 sectional density on it. So you're getting 3,700 foot-pounds of energy on it, but a very low sectional density. It's a pretty lightweight bullet for something like that.
Yes, and that's why it was never popular, because it didn't work. That's why.
Now, that article that you sent me, it may have been a year or so ago, about that warehouse in Mozambique that had the collections of all the guns that they'd confiscated, and how the 10.75 by 68 Mauser was one of the most popular ones there. That was very interesting to me, though.
It was good, but it had a reputation for being really good bullet for lions, and I can understand why, because you've got enough frontal surface area, and you've got enough velocity, and you've got a bullet that hasn't got much sectional density, so that bullet's going to not penetrate all that well and stop really quickly. So definitely for lions, it had a very bad reputation, but. If you read all the stories of all the old elephant hunters in Mozambique, I've never heard of one using net to hunt elephants, that's for sure, and I can understand why.
Yeah, John Taylor told us a story of shooting a buffalo in the head with one, and said it just left a lead scar on the buffalo's forehead. It probably gave him a heck of a headache, but it didn't penetrate it at all. So.
I can understand why, because the sectional density of that boy, that's not going to work. And I'm pretty sure that's why it wasn't popular at all.
Yeah, I'd also heard complaints about it was also available in kind of crummy rifles that had a lot of reliability problems and whatnot. I'll bet a lot of people got killed using that cartridge in Africa back in the old days.
I've never seen one or even used one, but I just know that. And there was a very famous old cattle rancher in Southwest Africa at that side. I think his name was Hard Battle, and he had a cattle farm up near Etosha National Park, where the lions used to get into his cattle, and he shot many, many lions with that. He thought it was very effective as lion medicine.
As a kind of a weird anecdote on my side, I've never seen one either, but I'm pretty sure my grandfather actually used to own one. He was a mechanic and a machinist, and he did an odd job, would always do odd jobs for people and this and that. He fixed some guy's car or something, and the guy paid him this is like the 1950s, guy paid him with giving him a rifle. And apparently this guy was in the army in World War II and was in Germany and had brought this rifle home with him. And my dad said he remembered being a little kid looking at this rifle with my grandfather, and they're like, what the heck is this thing, man? This thing is just giant, a giant hole in the barrel and all this stuff. And he said it was definitely a rifle. It was a bolt-action rifle, Mauser style. But they had no idea what it was. They were messing around with this. But this chamber was so big, they could put a 30-06 cartridge backwards into the chamber and close the bolt. And back at the time, of course, they couldn't get ammo or anything for it or reloading dies. And so my grandfather actually traded that rifle to P.O. Ackley himself and got him to Ackley improve one of his rifles. So God only knows what that rifle would be worth today. I don't know, but I always kind of wondered what it was, and I figured that it was probably the 10.75 by 68.
Yeah, and I wonder where that rifle is now.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, it's probably been all over the place. Now it's at a point where if someone really wanted to, they could get a hand load and reloading dies for it and all that. But who knows? We'll come back across the channel over from England back from Europe, continental Europe into England now. Let's talk about the .425 Wesley Richards. Came along 1909, brainchild of Leslie Taylor, director of Wesley Richards. First cartridge actually with a rebated rim, .435 caliber bullet, 410 grain bullet, .310 sectional density, 2,300 feet per second, muzzle velocity, 5,000 foot-pounds of energy. Once again, designed for use in Mauser-style rifles. Another kind of an oddball cartridge, though. Like, you hear about it every now and then, but it doesn't seem like it was extremely popular. Did you ever have any experience with the .425 Wesley Richards?
I did. I took an Indian fellow, the guy that developed 3 testicles, which I've spoken about a few times, and he had a Wesley Richards .425 double on a lion and buffalo hunt. And I never got popular. It was just a weird-looking cartridge. It just wasn't nice to look at because it had that rebated rim in it. And the Wesley Richards bolt-action rifles, they all came out with like 28-inch barrels, and which reportedly it was a fantastically effective cartridge, but it just the rifles were just too unwieldy. Anyway, this guy had it in the double, and to try and have a rebated rim in a double is probably the most difficult cartridge to get to eject properly, because you've got this little blade, that spring-loaded blade that flips up, which is actually your ejector. And you think about it, I mean, if you've got a dangerous game double rifle and your life depends on a tiny little spring that flips up this fingernail ejector, I just thought it was the most dumbest excuse. I didn't like it at all, because I thought it was just the wrong cartridge to have in a double rifle. The rifle was beautiful. It was from India. It was engraved with tigers and all that, and it certainly made short work of a really nice old Duggar boy, but it's not a rifle I would even consider as for dangerous game professional hunting or something like that, because even a rimless cartridge to get to work in the double is a bit of a finicky thing, and doubles are made for rimmed cartridges, so you got all that for the extraction of it. So I thought it was a dumb choice to have to use in a double rifle, but it certainly did work. That relatively large diameter 410 grain bullet at that velocity was very effective on buffalo, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean 5,000 foot-pounds of energy like that, and yeah. So that's interesting. Of all the hunting you've done and all the people you've known that have hunted and all that, the 10.75 Mauser and the 4.25 Wesley Richards, very, very little encounters with them in the wild, huh?
Yeah, they were. You read about them, but they were certainly not popular when I was hunting. Definitely not.
Well, so we were kind of all over the place there, going from 411 to the bigger bullets and whatnot. Now let's step down a little bit. Let's talk about all the 416s, because this was something where it seemed like it was really a sweet spot and was both popular and effective. And so let's go back to all the way back to where it started with the 416 Rigby. Gosh, came out early 1900s. Original load, you had the 410 grain bullet going about 2,350 feet per second, so about 4,900 foot-pounds of energy. This is one of those other just great sectional density bullets, .338 sectional density. Now, as you are fond of saying, right, this was the cartridge that got all the glory while the 404 did all the work because of old Harry Selby and Robert Rourke. I think I read somewhere that Rigby made fewer than 200 rifles in 416 Rigby.
I had to spend some time with Rigby and went at the Houston Safari Club show. Actually, Rigby gave a seminar there, and I spoke about the Rigby Duggar Boy competition at the same time. So I got to know Gary Duffy, who's the Rigby agent here in the States, and he told me quite emphatically that Rigby made 189 416 Rigbys. So that's the number we made. So so it definitely got all the glory, and it just worked. But I also told you the story that when things were going belly up in Zimbabwe, I was given 5 boxes of original Karnock 416 Rigby ammunition made in last run. So it must have been made in the probably 1960s. A little old lady, her husband had recently passed away, and she was cleaning out all his effects, and he found these 5 boxes, this unopened boxes of Rigby ammunition, and she brought them to my surgery one Friday morning when I used to have a surgery in the little town of Peroy. And my learner PH at the time, I had a PH, and he had a Ruger M77 Mark II in 416 Rigby with a 25-inch barrel, and we went and shot all this ammunition off. We didn't realize it was prime collector stuff, but quite a few classic hang fires, but we chronographed about a dozen of those cartridges, and what I found most interesting was that every one did 2,150 feet per second of about the dozen that we chronographed. And it was amazingly consistent. I've said before, I mean, the variation, but I just had a crony chronograph. I don't know really how accurate it was, but I mean, the velocities was only a spread of maybe 10 feet per second between the fastest and the slowest of those, but everything was around 2,150 feet per second. Which, if that's the truth be told, that's the 416 Rigby gained its reputation by producing 4,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, not 5,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. But I think that the combination of it going slower with really good sectional density, those 410 grain bullets. Probably just made it work really well because it was probably very shootable. If you do the math on that, you probably find it's less than 50 foot-pounds of recoil. And the quality of the expanding bullets in those days, the Volcanov bullets, probably wasn't as good as the bullets are today. So that slower velocity probably contributed to the bullets holding together better and penetrating really well. So I'm not surprised that the 416 Rigby got such a fantastic reputation because it just worked. And I once had lunch with Harry Selby when he was still alive, and he was. And I didn't realize that Harry Selby was shot left-handed, but his 416 Rigby was made on a standard length mouth action, and then with to the right-handed. And he certainly learned to shoot that rifle really well, and he was unique when he used to shoot. He was left-handed, so he would hold the rifle on his left hand by the pistol grip, and then he worked the bolt with his right hand. So, and he spent a lot of time slitting the stock down so he could do that effectively. And he was a small guy compared to my size. I mean, he was not a large man at all, and yet he handled the recoil of that really well. So I'm pretty sure he was probably using Carnot ammunition in those days. And so it was probably recoiling at probably less than 50 foot-pounds, but it certainly did work.
And you said it was an odd twist of fate where he had a Rigby double, right? And the truck ran over it, and he had to get that.
Leslie told and his boss, they shot a buffalo in open grassland somewhere, and they were busy starting to skin the buffalo, and he had no place nothing to lean his rifle against. So he just laid on the ground, and then his boss drove up in a safari car and drove over the barrels of his double and bent them. And and he needed to get another rifle as quickly as possible because he had another safari starting in a couple of days. So he went into the gun shop in Nairobi. I forget the name of it. It was quite a well-known gun shop. And there was this 416 Rigby there, which he had no other option but to acquire it. And he fell in love with it, and he used it for the rest of his hunting career. And I think he hunted professionally for 53 consecutive seasons, which is absolutely amazing.
Man. And
and on top of that, he was never scratched. He was never hurt in all his career. So he must have been either very lucky or an exceptionally good professional hunter.
Yeah, maybe a little of both.
Probably.
Yeah. So interesting story with that cartridge where it was not that popular, and then Robert Rourke helped make it pretty popular, but then it almost died when Kynoch stopped making ammo for it. But then Federal turned around and started producing 416 Rigby ammo in 1988, and then a couple years later, Ruger introduced their Safari Magnum rifle that was available in 375, 416 Rigby, and 458 Lot. And man, between those two things, it just came roaring back. And how
it's extremely popular now, and it's probably more popular now than it ever has been. And that's the nostalgia that goes with it. It's just got this reputation. It just works. But if the truth be told, in a 10-pound rifle, a 416 Rigby shooting a 400 grain bullet, it's now 400 grain bullet at 2,350 to 2,400 feet per second. That produces some pretty substantial recoil, and everybody wants to own a 416 Rigby, but it takes a bit of effort to get to shoot one really well, believe me.
It almost seems like that cartridge would be best served doing what you did with your 375 and just downloading it 100 feet per second or thereabouts and reducing that recoil, but you still got plenty of effectiveness out of it.
Right. Either that or just up the bullet rate. And funny enough, when I had lunch with old Harry Selby, he was very surprised that you couldn't get heavier bullets than 400 grains. But now you can get 430 grain bullet in a 416. Both make it. And I said we're going to talk about the 416 Remington next. But I just had a friend of mine or acquaintance of mine who's actually the professor of pathology. He went on a very extensive safari. He was almost like a retirement present, and he had a 416 Remington, and I convinced him to load 430 grain bullets in his 416 Remington that had a sedate velocity of 2,150 feet per second, basically to get the recoil down, because he's quite a slightly built guy, and he's probably nearly close to in his 70s, and he could not believe, and went on a very extensive safari. I think he shot 3 buffalo and 2 leopards and a couple of crocodiles, and then he was away for almost a month. And he said every pH, he had about 3 or 4 different pHs in Zambia and Mozambique, and they were just blown away by that ballistic combination. They really were.
Well, I believe it, especially with what we have access to today. You have these cartridges that built a reputation using the crummy Kynoch round nose solids and soft points, and now, so speaking specifically for the 416 Rigby, you can get Barnes factory ammo, Federal, Hornady, Norma, Swift, and then components from all of those places. Also Nosler, also Woodley, also North Fork. Just all kinds of options out there for it now. Just about any single one of them much better than what guys had even 50 years ago.
Yeah, and Rigby reintroduced the Rigby rifles, and I believe they're selling like cold beer at a barbecue on a hot day. Everybody wants to own one, and they're beautifully made, and they're very popular. So the Rigby now is probably that's at its peak of being this of popularity. It really is, and with good reason why. It's fantastic cartridge, and in modern day Rigby rifles, it's just the most wonderful combination.
Yeah, the guys at Rigby told me about 75% of their bolt action rifles are in 416 Rigby. So yeah. Now the problem is, other than Rigby though, you don't have a lot of other places where you can buy a new 416 Rigby rifle. Sacco makes the 85 in them, and you can get an old Ruger or thereabout, or an old CZ. It was too bad when CZ discontinued the 550. So, the good news is you can find the used ones and stuff out there where you can fork over a bunch of cash and buy a real nice Rigby rifle.
Yeah, that apprentice PH friend of mine that had that Ruger M77 Mark II and 416 Rigby, that was a beautiful rifle. It really was. It was well managed, well balanced, and I'm sure they must be available on the used second-hand market somewhere. But that was a fantastic rifle. I really liked it. It was well balanced, well made. No problems with the stock cracking and things like that. With some of the CZs, if you didn't work on them, you had problems. You quickly developed problems. But that Rigby that Ruger was a beautiful rifle. It really was.
I've known 2 Dangerous Game PH partners that in each case, one guy had a CZ in 416 Rigby, and the other guy had a rifle in 458 Lot. Now that was just funny how it worked out like that. Two different pairs like that. The guys didn't know each other or anything, but they were using the same guns. But what works. Well,
for a long time, my good friend Bud Salton of Salton McCullum Safari, that his PH rifle was a Ruger in 416, and he used that extensively. He abused it, and it just worked, and it never let him down. He now carries a Han 500 Nitro Express, but that was his go-to rifle for many years, and it was extremely effective.
Would it be reasonable to say that, at least among the PHs that you knew in Zimbabwe, probably more of them had a CZ rifle than a Ruger?
Oh, yes, very much so. I would say 80% of them had either CZs or Bruno. The old Bruno ZKK 602 was extremely popular.
Yeah.
That was the old, then that was the predecessor of the CZ 550. The only problem with that rifle was the backwards to fire safety catch, which was took a bit of getting used to. But then one of the versions that little pop-up peep sight was fantastic, because they were deadly accurate.
Well, we just talked about the 416 Rigby. We'll talk about they're not really related, but they're ballistic cousins, the 416 Remington. So it came out in 1988, and I kind of wonder if it coming out in 1988 also kind of helped revitalize the 416 bore diameter, and helping Federal pick the 416 Rigby back up and that sort of thing. But very similar ballistics, 400 grain bullet at 2,400 feet per second. So you're getting, once again, right around 5,000 foot-pounds of energy. Let's see here. It seemed like Remington was trying to replace the 416 Rigby, but it ended up, they both seemed like they were pretty popular. They worked in parallel with each other, but used a completely different design, right? So this was just a full-length .375 H&H necked up to .416 Rigby caliber, or .416 caliber. But it seemed like it also just worked darn well too. You can still get them in the Model 70 today, and I'm sure Remington just made a god awful number of Model 700s in it too.
It certainly did, and I related the story before, but when the .416 Remington came out, we were training learner professional hunters in the Zambezi Valley, and I took a woman on an elephant hunt, and it was in October in the Zambezi Valley. It was stinking hot, and she took a shot at a toughest elephant cow from Saron and shot too high, and the elephant was staggering around, and I told her to reload, and she had the most awful frozen bolt, and I shouted at her again, and she managed to get the bolt open and pulled it off, and she was carrying a Remington M700, and she pulled the extractor off. So that this cartridge case of the .416 Remington was stuck in the breech, and so she had a very expensive club. Anyway, then we phonographed some of that ammunition because we tried to figure out why this happened, and in those conditions in the Zambezi Valley, and apparently the box of ammo had been lying on the dashboard of a Toyota Land Cruiser, which the cab was closed, and so there's probably more than 100 degrees inside that cab. And so we emulated those conditions, and we fired off that round, and that was a 400 grain bullet. It was actually doing 2,500 feet per second.
Oh, so my goodness!
Jeez. God knows what the chamber pressure was, but that was enough to cause that cartridge case to stick. And then in a frantic effort to try and get a bolt open, and with the elephant cow staggering around, she pulled the extractor off. So that was an experience that's forever sealed in my fate, never to touch a Remington M700 on a dangerous game hunt, that's for sure. But I'm sure that was when the .416 Remington really came out. So maybe that was quite hotly loaded, or maybe it was just those environmental conditions at the time. But they were certainly really hot loads. But in a sort of controlled heat type of action, the .416 Remington's got a fantastic reputation. And as I mentioned before, if you just up that bullet weight a little bit and slow the velocity down, I think you reduce the recoil, because your impulse to duration of the recoil is longer, but only having a muzzle velocity of 2,150 feet per second. But that's compensated by the wonderful sectional density of a 430 grain .416 bullet. That's just an absolutely deadly combination.
Yeah,
and what is also quite interesting, and I was on a hunt with a guy actually had a .416 Rigby, and he was using 430 grain Norfolks, and we recovered some of those, and he also shot some 400 grain Barnes X bullets out of the .416 Rigby. Now I've actually got maybe I should send you those photographs. You can put it on your Instagram or your thing. But comparing the final expanded diameter between a 430 grain and a 400 grain, I think there's almost the 430 grain expanded to like a 30% greater final expanded diameter. And, with permanent wound channel, it's 3 times the bullet's final expanded diameter. So if your bullet's expanding to a larger final diameter, you would find that the wound channel is just substantially larger. And then in this particular case, it was shot on a big buffalo bull from Saron. The bullet was recovered on the opposite shoulder, facing backwards, but underneath the skin, when we skinned the animal, you could actually see there was a massive amount of what we call bloodshot meat on the opposite shoulder. So what that told me is that the bullet penetrated right through the buffalo, but it's fully expanded. When it gets to the opposite skin, it can't exit the skin because it's got this massive big mushroom. So it releases most of its energy at that point. The skin bulges outward in what we call the trampoline effect. And as the skin sort of rebounds backwards, the bullet then flips over and is found bucked or facing backwards, but underneath this, just an inch or so away from the skin, in an area where there's a massive amount of bloodshot meat, which tells me that all that energy is released into that chest, into that area, and just absolutely deadly effective. So the same rifle, 2 different bullets, different bullet weight, one expanding substantially more than the other. It just tells me it's a no-brainer which one is the most effective.
Yeah. My only concern with having that much more expansion would be if it hampered penetration, but it sounds like it, at least in this case, maybe it might have penetrated a little less, but it still penetrated enough.
No, I think the extra bullet weight the extra weight gives it greater momentum, which compensates for the larger frontal surface area. So the two seem to balance each other out.
Okay, makes sense.
I wouldn't like to use those for backing shots in a going away shot, but certainly for initial shot from side on, it makes a huge difference to, I believe, to the size of the permanent wound channel, which the bigger the hole, the more hemorrhage, the more air that gets let into the chest cavity, the more effective the combination is. Well, that's sort of my reasoning about it.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It is interesting how many 416 caliber rifle cartridges there are out there. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff in this specific bore diameter, and it seems like that for whatever reason, 416 caliber is just right in that sweet spot for what really seems to work as far as you get a big jump up in performance over the 9.3s and the 3.75s. But recoil is more, but it's not terrible. But it's penetrating really well, and it really is effective on game. All of that stuff. How often did you see the various 416s get used in Africa, say compared to the other bore diameters that were common for dangerous game?
Well, I think the 375 is by far the most common, and because I'm a great believer in one rifle for everything, and they're just being, and we used to shoot everything from impala to buffalo, crocodile, all the hippo, everything. And so the 375 was by far the most popular, but next after the 375 was the 416s. And the 416 Remington was probably the most popular of the 416s because 416 Remington ammunition was a lot less expensive than 416 Rigby ammunition, which was really pricey.
Yeah, the 416 Rigby is a weird looking cartridge with how fat it is, and it's got that kind of weird neck and everything to it. And I kind of wonder if it's just really expensive to manufacture, just more difficult to make than the more conventional looking 416 Remington.
It could be, but also, the 416 Rigby takes 20 grains more powder to get the same velocity. It was designed for quarters. So it's got this, and they were really worried about pressure in those days. So they've got this overly large case, which to keep the pressures low. But I don't know. I like it. I think it looks sexy looking cartridge. If someone said to me, you can choose the 416, which one do you choose? I without doubt I would choose a Rigby just because of the nostalgia.
Yeah, the nostalgia is definitely cool about it too. And you're right about the pressure. The maximum SAMI pressure for the 416 Rigby is 52,000 psi, 65,000 psi for the 416 Remington. So that it seems like it's operating right at the limit for what you can get out of that 375 case with the 416 Remington.
And when you're hunting in the Zambezi Valley in October, I think that does make a difference for sure. And when we start talking about the Weatherby cases, it was certainly known to have sticky extractions when it got really hot with the Weatherbys because of that chamber pressure.
Now, before we get to the Weatherby, I want to talk about another one that was kind of short-lived. 416 Taylor came out in 1972. This was a squared legitimized this cartridge. So it seemed like basically a 4.58 Win Mag. Itself a short and 3.75, neck down to 416 caliber. And I mean, it seems like, I've never shot one of these myself, but just looking at what's published for it seems like you're getting darn near 416 Rigby ballistics out of an even smaller cartridge that fits in a standard length rifle action like that. 400 grain bullet at 2,300 feet per second. You have any experience with it? Any thoughts on it?
No experience whatsoever. I've never even heard of anybody ever using a 416 Taylor in Zimbabwe. Certainly not in my 30 years. I read about it. During my time, the 4.58 Win Mag was still having a few problems with not getting enough velocity because of the powder available and stuff like that. So it was a cartridge that never interested me because I thought, if the 4.58 Win Mag's having problems, then the 416 Taylor certainly must be having problems. And I don't know, you certainly couldn't get ammo for it, and I've never heard of anyone, certainly never knew of anybody even using one during my 30 years when I was involved in hunting.
Norma lists one factory load for the cartridge on their website, 375 grain solid at 2,350 feet per second. Let me see what sort of sectional density that is. It's an interesting.
I'm sure they're using that lighter bullet because it's trying to make it shorter so they can get enough powder in there to get that velocity up. So,
yeah, I mean,
I think that negates all the good things about the 416 if you're going to use a bullet weight less than 400. You know, I mean, what is the sectional density of a 375 grain 416 caliber?
0.31.
Yeah, just barely makes it. Yeah. No, I would. If someone wanted to use that, I said, hell, rather use something better. Go for a 404 or something else. You know, use something better.
Yeah, you know, if the 416 Remington is really struggling to shoot a 400 grain bullet at 2,400 feet per second, you know, it's getting 65,000 psi and is ripping extractors off and stuff when it's hot. I'm skeptical that you can do that with a cartridge that's half an inch shorter.
Yeah, I would be very skeptical as well. I would take it with a large pinch of salt. That's for sure.
Now, you know, different way of doing it though. The same general concept or same concept of getting that performance out of a standard action cartridge. We have the 416 Ruger, but in this case though, they're using a much fatter cartridge. I mean, the Ruger cartridge is fatter, it's a beltless cartridge, fatter around the actual cartridge case than the 375 is around the belt. So even though it's shorter, it has a pretty good powder capacity. So this one, and once again, it's advertising 416 caliber, 400 grain bullet at 2,400 feet per second. So, I mean, it's right up there, but still in that standard length action. We had one client bring one over, it's been several years ago now, in a Ruger guide gun, and he killed 2 buffalo and a sable and everything with it and did great with it. But it looked like he was really struggling with recoil with it. I think that rifle is a little bit too light.
Yeah. What is the chamber pressure of the 416 Ruger, John?
I'll bet it's 65,000 psi. Let me look. 62,366 62,000 psi.
Yeah. And that Ruger guard, I had shot a 416 Ruger, and then that guard gun that had that whole, you know, sort of rubber stock and all that. And I remember it being pretty punchy. I really did. It was. But then what year did the 416 Ruger come out? When was it released?
Let's see here. 2008.
Yeah, you see, I was already a displaced farmer by that stage. So, you know, I'd almost finished hunting by then. So I have no experience with it, but I can see it would work. I mean, you can't BS the map. I mean, those ballistics are exactly the same as the Rigby and the Remington. So it doesn't matter how the bullet gets sent down the barrel. If it's a 400 grain bullet being 2,400 feet per second, they're all going to work the same.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know you had some initial complaints about the Ruger guide gun because it was too light. I think you said that original rifle is like 7 pounds. They've since upped it.
7.5 pounds, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so now it's 8.1. So I guess they made the stock heavier. And so you put a scope and whatnot on it, and you're looking probably about 9.5 pounds on it.
Yeah, man, I should imagine if you do the math on that, you're going to be almost 70 foot-pounds of recoil, I'm sure.
I think the Ruger guide gun is a great rifle for a 375 Ruger, but I think a 416 Ruger is pushing it a little bit.
I would think.
Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing about all of this stuff, though, so we skipped over ammo a little bit, right? So the 416 Rigby, basically everybody makes ammo for it now. Same with the 416 Remington. Both of those are real popular. Barnes for both, Federal for both, Hornady for both. Norma makes 416 Taylor and 416 Rigby, but not 416 Remington. Nosler makes 416 Remington, but not the others. Swift makes Rigby and Remington. Of course, everybody makes components for them. Hornady's the only company that makes 416 Ruger ammo, but of course you can hand load the same bullets and that as everything else. But the interesting thing I've noticed with both of the Ruger cartridges, the 375 and the 416, is even though Ruger's the only company that makes ammo for them, only big company that makes ammo for them, it seemed like it's easy to find, especially now that they've got that DGX bonded bullet and whatnot out there. It seems like there's always some available that you can buy somewhere. So you got that going for you with them. But also Ruger is the main company that makes rifles in 416 Ruger too. You got the Hawkeye African and you got the Ruger guide gun and whatnot. So still kind of a niche cartridge, but I think those are some of the most affordable ones that you can get if a guy was wanting, American wanted to go over there with a controlled feed action rifle. You got the Model 70 you can get in 458, 416 Remington, and 375, and then you got the Ruger guns, and that's it as far as stuff that's controlled feed and is in current new production now.
Now, that friend of mine that went hunting that big bag, he had a Winchester Model 70 and 416 Remington, and that was a fantastic combination. It really was, and it's heavy enough. And I've got my personal biggest rifle now is a Model 70 and 375 H&H, and gee, that's a beautiful rifle. I can see why we're calling it the rifleman's rifle or whatever. It was beautiful, it's just smooth feeding, well made, heavy enough. I really do like it. And that combination in 416 Remington is probably the best. If you want to go the 416 route, that's probably the best option if you're not going to go and spend all that money on a 416 Rigby in the Rigby rifle.
Mm-hmm. I can see that. I've told you before I have that M77 Mark II in 375, and they made it in 416 Rigby too. Mine is very interesting with the scope, full magazine, and a sling on it. It weighs 11.5 pounds. It's shockingly heavy, and
that's why it's so nice to shoot.
It is. It's very nice to shoot, and I kind of wonder if Ruger put the exact same barrels on all of them and just drilled a bigger hole, so maybe that 416 would be a little bit lighter and the 458 be a little bit lighter still. But I don't know. Like it feels a lot heavier than it looks. Everyone that I hand it to is like, "Oh man, this thing's heavy."
But that's what makes them nice to shoot. I've had shot the 416 in a Ruger, and I can't remember what it weighed, but recoil was definitely manageable. It was pleasant to shoot. It really was.
Well, let's talk about one where recoil is less manageable in the 416 Weatherby. All right.
God, I hate the 416 Weatherby. I really do. My ears have been ringing for the last 30 years because of one of those damn things. It's just too much of everything. I've told it before that, but when I learned the PH, we had a guy and ended up shooting 3 buffalo with one shot with a 416 Weatherby and a Barnes Bandit solid. Through one bull, through another cow into a second cow. So,
my goodness.
Yeah, and while nobody was, and that was just one of those incidents. I was still a learner, and I was told to go and fetch the Land Cruiser. You go for it, go fetch the Land Cruiser. And I was walking with the game scout, and after the bull that was the target animal was a bull, and we'd been shot at him. I was just walking back, and the game scout said, "Oh, look, there's a blood spot." So we followed it, and sure enough, there was a buffalo cow looking very sick. And he said, "You better shoot that cow. That cow's just been wounded." And I shot it. And then we carried on walking back to the Land Cruiser. And there was another blood sport. And there was a second cow. And in that second cow was the first bullet. So that bullet went through a bull and the second cow and into a third. And if that's not a recipe for disaster, then I don't know what is. So there's absolutely no reason on earth to have a shoot a 400 grain bullet at 2,700 feet per second. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, you get 6,000 foot-pounds of energy out of it, but you also get 85 foot-pounds of recoil energy too.
Yeah, and then so what they do to make them excuse me, so to make them shootable, they put a muzzle brake on it, and then that's like having a howitzer go off next to you. You muzzle blast from here to next week. As I explained before, the first time the guy took a shot of the Weatherby, he said, "See where I'm shooting?" And I was standing sort of to the side of him and slightly behind him, looking at the target with my binoculars. And I, like a fool, I didn't block my ears. And as he shot it, it blew my hat off. And I'm sure it's the effect of a stun grenade. He said, "Did I hit it?" And I said, "What did you hit? What?" I was almost unconscious on my feet from that muzzle blast. It was the most horrific experience.
Whew, man, was this the guy that you told the story of the Weatherby man on his flip-flop safari?
That was all flip-flops, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he ended up shooting 2 buffaloes. I also told the story. He ended up shooting 2 buffalo with his backing shot on his buffalo, went through one buffalo and shot a second buffalo through both its front legs. So he got charged. I've told that story before, but I mean, there's a Weatherby. Every time I've seen a Weatherby used, more than one buffalo has been shot with one shot. So that's not what.
Wow. So you man, multiple stories of multiple buffalo being wounded with one shot from that.
If a guy said, I'm coming to hunt with this 416 Weatherby, I said, well, go and find someone else to hunt with. I'm not interested in even looking at another one because of that. I'm scarred for life, as I'm sure you can understand.
Oh, yeah. So this cartridge, for the listener, came out in 1989. So it's a 378 Weatherby case. And the 378 Weatherby is a unique case, but it's a very, very fat case design along the lines of the 416 Rigby. Necked up to 416 caliber. Federal had to design the 215 primer for the 378 Weatherby because the case was so big. And so you have that pushing a 416 caliber bullet. A very long, very fat cartridge. You need a Magnum action for it. And like Kevin said, 400 grain bullet at 2,700 feet per second. And one of the other problems to get that velocity is you need that 26-inch long barrel to effectively burn that powder from that giant charge. And then the other deal is quite often it comes with a muzzle brake on it too. So not only is it loud, but it's even longer. So you got like a 28-inch barrel with this thing. So it's great performance on paper and it kills the heck out of stuff if you got the right bullets, but you got all those other downsides in terms of recoil, muzzle blast, especially for the poor guy standing next to you, and then the possibility of shots exiting when you don't expect them to.
Yeah, it's an interesting novelty, but I don't think it's applicable for this modern day and age, in my opinion.
Well, so we talked. So, you got everything that you like about the 416 caliber stuff, but like I like to say about all the Weatherbys, it's everything you liked with more, and then everything you don't like with more of it too. So everything on steroids with them.
There is one other 416 we haven't got on the list. That's the 500 416, which is I think it was brought out by Krieghoff. I can't remember who did it, but it's a rim cartridge for double rifles, and it does exactly the same thing. It's just and now Rigby brought out the 416 number 2, which is just a 416 Rigby with a rim version of it for use in their double rifles, which would be a very effective combination.
Yeah, so the 500 416 came out in 1996. So man, just right at the peak of that last wave of American safari hunters going over after apartheid ended, all the American guys in the baby boom generation going to Africa then. You got your full certification, your full license, 94, 95?
92.
92, okay. So early 90s. So yeah, Krieghoff comes out with this cartridge. And so, I mean, it's the same thing we've been talking about, but just in double rifles. Krieghoff and Heim make rifles in them now. Norma makes factory ammo for it, but I think they're the only ones that do. So everything you like about the 416 Rigby, but in a double rifle. Well, let's jump up to the old 45 caliber stuff. So I guess we got to go back in time to the 450 Nitro Express, 1898. One of the older ones we'll talk about today, from Rigby, rimmed cartridge, similar to the old 450 black powder, but using cordite. 480 grain bullet, 2,150 feet per second. So that's a 327 sectional density bullet, 4,700-ish foot-pounds of energy. But I imagine if they are advertising 2,150, you're probably getting, I don't know what.
Just over 2,000, I should imagine. And it worked because that was the transition from black powder to smokeless powder. And as I have mentioned before, my game ranger friend in the Kruger National Park, his everyday caviar rifle is a Heim in 450 Nitro Express 3 1/4. And he shoots 500 grain bullets, and his Heim is regulated he shoots those bullets at exactly 2,200 feet per second. And he says that does everything that he needs. He doesn't need anything else. And it's interesting that Heim is regulated at 15 meters because that's his average shooting distance that he uses that rifle for. So, he's a game ranger, which is basically his job is to sort out problem animals and he carries that rifle every day, and he says that does everything that he needs. That ballistic combination of 500 grain bullet at 2,200 feet per second, it gives him all the penetration he needs. You were telling me the other day he was using a load with this this 500 grain, the Whitley Hydro, this unusually shaped bullet called the Whitley Hydro, and he had a big elephant bull, and his head was up, and he took a shot, and the elephant dropped, and the bullet exited through the head and exited between the shoulder blades. So that from the penetration of that combination.
Ooh, man. Now, I heard that they had a lot of teething issues with that problem, or with that cartridge having problems with pressure and this and that. And they eventually ironed it all out, but there was maybe a stopgap sort of deal that turned into its own cartridge, the 500 450. So, like we talked about, with the 500 nitro neck down to 416, 500 nitro neck down to 458 caliber here.
See, the 500 450, that was a Holland proprietary cartridge. So when Rigby brought out the 500 Nitro Express, that was Holland and Holland wanted their own cartridge, so they just copied it by producing the 500 450, which is basically the same ballistics, but it was a proprietary cartridge for Holland and Holland.
Now, President Theodore Roosevelt brought one of those to Africa with him, a Holland and Holland double in 1909, and did really well with it. He killed a rhino with it, among other things, that he had shot a bunch of times with the 30-06 in his 405 Winchester, and finally put the fourth thing down with the 500 nitro, or the 500 450 nitro. But so same deal, like you like to say, same ballistics. Doesn't matter how it's getting down the barrel, but you're shooting that 45 caliber 480 grain bullet at that velocity, and it just does magical things to game, and it just flat out works.
Yeah, that all worked until what is in 1909, and when the Brits banned the 450 in the Sudan in India. So the Holland and Holland then brought out the 500 465. All they did was just make the bullet slightly larger. So, and then that's when the 470 came out and all the others, because basically the 450 Nitro Express was then obsolete because it was banned in some countries. So that's skewed the proliferation of all the other cartridges greater than 450.
Yeah, that is very interesting, where you see a lot of weird stuff that happened due to that ban, and then you also see weird stuff happening due to the proprietary nature of some of these cartridges, like the 425 Wesley Richards and that sort of thing, where certain things took off, where they were released to the trade, like you like to say, with the 470 and the I think the 404 as well, and others that was not the case.
Yes, everybody wanted to keep. I think the gun business was so good in those days with India and with Africa in those colonial days that the different gun companies could make enough money by keeping their cartridge proprietary. If you wanted to buy a Holland and Holland Royal double, then you had to come in, 500 465, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. But all the good things about the 450 Nitro Express, everyone liked them, and someone came up with the good idea in the 1950s. Let's take a 375, shorten it, neck it up to 45 caliber, and we can put this thing in a standard linked action Model 70 for all these Americans that want to go hunt in Africa after World War II, and we can just duplicate those ballistics and just put it in a 26-inch barrel. Everything's going to be good. And it was one of those great ideas in theory that they had a lot of teething problems with what we now call the 458 Win Mag. Now they've gotten them straightened out, but can you talk a little bit about those initial issues?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, it was I knew a guy called Ken Stewart, and he was the PH on the safari when Winchester brought the 458 Win Mag. He was in Kenya to test it, and those initial loads were so compressed that they had to glue the bullets into the cartridge case to stop the bullets being pushed out. And that worked initially, but then eventually the powder started to clump into unburnable lumps, and that's what old Jack Lott discovered, and that was the reason why the 458 Lot came out. But I knew a guy called Don Heath. He worked for the Zimbabwe Department of National Parks, and he was telling me that they had a whole lot of .458 ammo in the storage in the armory, and when they looked at the ammo, all the heads of the bullets that were pushed out of the neck of the cases because of as a result of the highly compressed loads, because the powders at the time they just couldn't get that velocity without putting as much, forcing so much powder in they had to compress it. And that's what originally gave all the .458 Win Mag its problems. And initially there were horrible stories of bullets actually bouncing off elephants' heads, and some guys shooting at the rifle range and actually seeing the bullet rolling along the ground as it didn't even, it was doing terribly low velocity. So they started chronographing it, and I did hear some stories that some of the velocities were as low as 800 feet per second with .458 Win Mag ammo.
Yeah, so when the powder was clumping real bad like that, you weren't getting a full burn out of it, and you were just getting terrible velocities?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it clumped into clumps almost the size of a pea. There were huge big clumps, and then they wouldn't burn. So you were getting these squib loads, and they definitely weren't working. And that was then everybody was horrified about it. And then the factories downloaded. They stopped saying it was a 500 grain bullet doing 2,150 feet per second. I think they decreased that to 2,040 feet per second. But so good is the 500 grain .458 bullet that the .458 Win Mag just refused to die. The guys quickly sorted out the problem, and I mean it's a very popular round now, and it's funny enough, it's the standard cartridge for all the game ranges at the Kruger National Park. The guys that are just the general game ranges, the guys that are not doing the problem animal control and things like that. So the problems have been sorted out, and with judicious hand loading, you could certainly get that magical ballistics that everybody I've quoted many times before, the 500 grain .458 bullet doing 2,150 feet per second. And that has been proven that combination just works. And when I was trained as a PH, that was the standard recommendation for dangerous game hunting and for guarding in Zimbabwe. This is what we recommend that you use. And if you couldn't handle that level of recoil, and then they would advise you to go look for another profession.
Yeah, so a 500 grain .458 caliber bullet has a sectional density of .341, and that's the best out of everything we have talked about today.
And that is the secret why it works so well. That is absolutely and then that's the sort of the gold standard for sectional density when it comes to dangerous game bullets, I believe. And we now know that even if you exceed that number, things get even better. So and it just works. And we're going to talk about the .458 a lot next, and that's probably the most common cartridge carried by professional hunters in Africa, dangerous game professional hunters in Africa today. And the only reason that they carry it is because it just works. It's a combination that works, and with reasonable amount of recoil. And I mean, you can certainly learn to handle the recoil of a 10 or 11 pound .458 lot, shooting that sort of ballistic combination.
Yeah. The Hornady current factory loads advertise 500 grain bullet at 2140 feet per second, and so yeah, with good powder, good modern powder, you can hit it. It's interesting. They were a little bit too ambitious at first. If Winchester would have used a 480 grain bullet, maybe they could have wouldn't have.
Also remember when the .458 came out, it came out with a 510 grain bullet initially.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was even longer. So that compounded the problem, So I have no idea why they would have brought it up with the 510 grain bullet. But it originally came out with a 510 grain bullet.
But like you mentioned earlier, people had problems. A guy named Jack Lott had some problems, and when he was in the hospital recovering from his buffalo attack, he designed his own cartridge.
That's known as good motivation, John.
Oh, man. Yeah, definitely. So instead of shortening this 375 to fit in a standard length rifle action, he just necked up a 375 basically and had it work in a full length Magnum action. And so now you can easily get 2150 out of it. I think modern factory loads will do about 2,300 feet per second with a 500 grain bullet. And so you got plenty of wallop there.
You certainly have, and you probably don't need to go that fast, because if you're using, when the PH is using his rifle as a stopping rifle, you're talking about spinning distance just about. A 50 meter would be a long shot for a PH if he's using in a stopping situation. So you probably don't need 2-3. You could easily drop it to 2,200 feet per second, or even 2,150 feet per second, and get all the stopping punch that you need.
Yeah, so this cartridge hit the scene 1971. A Squared actually helped usher this one across the finish line with Sammy, 1995. 500 grain bullet at 2,300 feet per second is giving you, about 5,900 foot-pounds of energy, almost 80 foot-pounds of recoil, so stout. With the right rifle, the right guy could handle it, though. And like I said, I've known a number of PHs that have used it. Would you say that, as far as guys that use bolt guns in Africa, among PHs, 4.58 Lot's the most popular?
By a long margin, I would think, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the Ruger Safari Magnum was available in it. So was CZ. Blosser made some rifles in it. One of my PHs in South Africa actually has an old FN Browning in 4.58 Lot. I think it started life as a 4.58 Win Mag, and he reamed it out. And I'll bet
the most common rifles were the ZKK 602, the Bruno 602, and the CZ 550. But they were all 4.58 Win Mags. They came out as 4.58 Win Mags. And there was a gunsmith in Harare who could chamber. He had a reamer that he could do through the breech end, so he didn't have to take the barrel off, and he would just increase the chamber length from 4.58. And there was a bit of confusion because theoretically the 4.58 lot is a point. I think it's a .280 case length, while the 375 is a .285. I'm not 100% sure, but everybody then just take straight 4.58. 375 H&H cases, and then just fire for them. They've never shortened those cases at all, and that just worked really well.
Yeah, that it's funny that you mention that because let's see here. I know the Ruger Safari Magnum did not come out in 4.58 Lot until like 2002, something like that. They made it for a long time with not in that chambering. And I know they eventually picked it up in the CZ 550 towards the end of its run, but I don't know when. So I'm not surprised to hear that so many of the darn rifles made, so many of the 4.58s running around Africa today started as a 4.58 Win Mag that just got reamed out. And so
that's correct. They also had a 450 Watts as well, which had a very slight shoulder, but it wasn't nearly as common as the 4.58 Lot.
The same general idea seems like, though.
It was very much, yeah. It was the same general idea.
So right now, I'm not aware of any company that makes rifles in 4.58 Lot from the factory. You can find the old CZs and Rugers and whatnot out there, and of course, you could take a 4.58 Win Mag and ream it out. You can still get the 4.58 Win Mag in the Winchester Model 70. Then all the old stuff too. And gosh, it seems like once again, just everybody makes ammo for both of those cartridges. Barnes, Federal. You can get the Banded Solid and the TSX from Barnes. You can get the Trophy Bonded Bear Claw and Sledgehammer, A-Frame, Woodley Hydro Solid from Federal, the DGX Bonded DGS from Hornady. You can get stuff from Norma. Nosler, believe it or not, does not make it, but Swift does for both. And of course, just the component bullets for all of them. So yeah, just both of them super duper popular to this day. And it makes sense though with what you're saying with how popular this thing is with PHs that use bolt action rifles. How common was either cartridge among visiting clients in your experience?
Not really, because they couldn't really handle the recoil. So most guys now used to just basically hunt buffalo, and my recommendation was just bring a 375. And so I never really had guys come out specifically with that just to hunt buffalo, because I thought the recoil was just probably too much for Mr. Average on a buffalo hunt. So in my experience, the most common cartridge that my clients use was a 375 H&H. Mm-hmm. And I used to then, if they got a veteran reloading, I would then send them that 380 grain rider bullets to load it in, or 350s, and that certainly as I mentioned before, pushed the thermal performance of the 375 up. It really shifted it up a gear by going to those heavier bullets.
So, out of curiosity, how were you, booking clients and communicating with them before in advance of the hunt and whatnot back when you were in the game?
When my perfect shot came out, because everybody used to contact me. It was even before websites and stuff like that. People would just write to me and say, read your book and I want to come and hunt a buffalo. My first little book in Yachty also was a wonderful advertisement for buffalo hunting. So that came out in the 1998 or might even, I can't remember when it was published, but that was a wonderful. And then when I took those books to the various shows, the Zimbabwe Professional Hunters and Guides Association used to have a booth at the shows, and when my little book in Yachty came out, I was at the Zimbabwe Professional Hunters booth at the Dallas show, and I went to SCI and I also went to the Eastern show. And, that was just people coming to meet me at the booths and would book the hunts like that. Because those were the days before the internet and, social media and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, back then, seemed like that was darn near the only way to meet a guy was you had to go to a show and you meet him in person. And if you guys got on well, then you'd, book a hunt together. And, there was no finding him online or anything. Otherwise you wrote him a letter, huh?
I mean, I've been going to those shows for nearly 30 years. I've been every year for about 30 years. So that was where you did your marketing back in those days.
Mm-hmm. What would you say was your number 2 most popular cartridge behind the 375 for Dangerous Game among your clients?
I mean, the 416 Remington.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. Well,
but I'm actually, quite a few of the clients. I had 2 clients rifles. I had a 9.3 and I had a 375, that Browning A-Bolt medallion. And in those days, people said, listen, just come in and hunt with me. I've got 2 rifles you can use and I'll supply the ammo and everything. So, and that was quite common back in those days, when people just used to come and use my rifles. Mm-hmm. And I also got into the hunting the Indian market, the guys from India, and they couldn't bring their rifles out of India. So, it was very hard for them to bring their rifles out of India. So they just used to use my rifles.
Did you ever have any clients come over and bring a 9.3 by 62?
No, they just all used mine. Mm-hmm. By then, those days, the 9.3 was unheard of in America. So it's becoming more popular now. But I mean, and it was just and I liked it as my client rifle because it was so shootable. And I had quite a few women clients that used it. They could certainly shoot it pretty effectively.
How much did your 9.3 weigh?
It was when fully loaded with 5 rounds in the magazine and scope. It was 10 pounds.
Oh man, yeah, I'll bet that thing was a joy to shoot.
Yeah, I think the recoil was like 28 foot-pounds of recoil engine. I think I've worked it out once, which is sweet. And people said, "Oh, this thing's so heavy," and it was, as I said before, it's one of those cartridges that just shoots punches well above its weight.
Yeah,
and it was effective. Even you shot it. Only buffalo I ever saw wounded and lost was shot with a 375 8.8 and it was one of those hopped up 375 8.8 and a 300 grain loaded partition. But in my hunting career, we never had buffalo wounded and lost. I mean, they were quite proud of that fact. And one of them was shot with an RC because you just shot place and was so good because people didn't have flinch and there was no reason to flinch, but the rifles were just so shootable.
Yeah, I mean, that's 30-06 level recoil you were getting out of that heavy rifle like that.
Yeah.
Well, getting back to 45 caliber stuff, we finished up with the 458 lot. Now we got another one of these really new cartridges, the 450 Rigby. 416 Rigby necked up, basically. Intended for use in magazine rifles. Nosler Norma make ammo for it. Got a 500 grain partition at 2350 for about 6,100 foot-pounds of energy. Norma makes a 500 grain solid at 2,500 for 6,900 foot-pounds of energy. Or a 550 grain soft at 2,100 for 5,387. Know anything about the 450 Rigby? Any experience with it?
I do. There's a game ranger friend of mine in the bottom end of the Kruger Park called Niels van Beek, and he's a proponent of the 450 Rigby, and he just actually swears by it. There's a bit of a problem there because in the New South Africa, the fence around the Kruger National Park is getting stolen, so the buffalo get out and there's sugarcane fields in that area around Crocodile Bridge, and then these old Duggar boys get into the sugarcane, and you imagine that's a perfect environment for them to live. And when the labor go in there to change irrigation pipes or the fertilizer, they see the tracks of these buffalo that are living in the sugarcane, and then they refuse to go in it. So it's the job of the game rangers to go in and get these buffalo out of the sugarcane. And their weapon of choice is a 450 Rigby shooting a 550 grain. It's actually a rhino soft point. Because what they do, they bathe the buffalo with Jack Russells. These Jack Russells, those little terrier-type dogs, like it. Mm-hmm. And can you imagine the sugarcane's 14 or 15 foot tall, and they can hear the dogs barking, and you just walk towards the sound of the dogs barking, and I reckon 10 paces is a long shot in those situations.
Jeez.
The dogs. And and they reckon that 550 grain bullet out of a 450 Rigby does the trick. It really does. It's an expanding bullet, and I've got the photos of the exit wounds, and those bullets shoot right. I mean, it blows the size of your fist out the other side, and sometimes even the lungs are blown out or sucked out the other side. Extremely effective. What they also do now with problem elephants, they're shooting 600 grain 458 bullets in the 450 Rigby. And that 600 grain 458 bullet, I think the sectional density is 0.409. And they reckon that gives them full body length penetration. So this is not hunting, this is problem animal control, because the elephants also get out and they get into the corn, and these guys have to go and sort these problems out. And so they can kill an elephant from any angle. So if they see the elephant, if he's quartering away, going straight away, quartering on, doesn't matter. They can kill him from any angle with a 600 grain 458 bullet out of a 450 Rigby. And that bullet's thing 2,150 feet per second, that magic velocity again.
So comparing this to, say, a 458 lot, you have the ability to launch that much heavier 550 or 600 grain bullet still at that great velocity, which the 458 lot just can't quite do.
I think the 458 lot, not many people load 550 grain in the 458 lot, but it's certainly the 450 Rigby handles that really comfortably.
Yeah, looking around, I could not find a lot of factory ammo choices for it. Let me think here. Nosler actually makes one, and I think Norma does too. And so otherwise, it seems like it's a custom hand load, either from yourself or someone else.
They hand load, they just hand load, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So very specialized rifle, but it seems like it works really well in that use case.
Well, basically the 450 Rigby and the 460 Weatherby are basically the same case. It's just that the Weatherby's got a belt on it. I think the case dimensions are exactly the same.
Yeah, they're real similar. You're right. The 460 Weatherby, we can talk about it now, is a necked up 378 Weatherby, which it's a unique case design, but it looks a lot like a 416 Rigby. And
it's got that double radius shoulder,
Mm-hmm. So once again, real fat, long case. So the 460 Weatherby, you're shooting a 500 grain bullet at 2,600 feet per second, so 7,500 foot-pounds of energy with it, and 110 foot-pounds of recoil energy.
Oh, just ridiculous. Yeah.
Now,
I've told the story where I missed an elephant at 30 paces with a 460 Weatherby. Side-on elephant. Came for a heart-lung shot and missed the elephant. And that's because very few people can handle that kind of recoil.
We had a client bring a 460 Weatherby over in 2022, shot a buffalo with it, and he made a poor shot, but I don't think it was his fault. It was a tough shot. But in any case, they chased it up, and on the follow-up, he shot it going away from him right in front of one of the hips. Full-length body penetration, exited the front shoulder, hit the horn, and went through the horn on his way out.
No, I don't quite see the point in all that. That's just too much of everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he got some Weatherby scope eye out of that deal. He got a good story out of it. And he looked really cool, and he was really happy. But
in Africa, the Weatherbys were known as the Weatherbies. mainly because of just poor shooting performance. So everybody just became it's had such a flinch with that muzzle blast and that recoil that I've never met a person that could shoot one really well. But the guys that did have the 460 Weatherby, they all used to pull all the bullets out of the cartridges and dump, I think it was 10 or 20 grains of powder out of it and then reseat the bullets. So it would just bring that velocity down to where it should be, So, and that made a huge difference. It was just reducing the load in those cartridges. But you also had some situations with guys using the 460 Weatherby, though. I don't know what the chamber pressure is in the 460 Weatherby, but there were cases of, in hot conditions, sticky bolts and difficult to lift the bolts and sticky extraction, because I'm sure just too much chamber pressure.
Yeah, that is one of those cartridges that is designed, it is optimized more for performance than it is for reliability. The exact opposite of, say, a 375 or something like that, or 300 H&H. 65,000 SAMI maximum pressure for the 460 Weatherby. Now we didn't talk about recoil on the 450 Rigby. I mean, it's also a giant case. It's shooting a giant bullet with a lot of powder, but it's not going nearly as fast as is the case like with the Weatherby cartridges, though. So I imagine recoil is very stout with the 450 Rigby, but you would think it's less than, say, the 460 Weatherby then?
I'm sure, and also the duration of the recoil because of that punch of that extra velocity. But I've got another good story to tell you about the 460 Weatherby. There was a very well-known gun writer in South Africa called Vladimir Steyn. He used to write for Magnum. And he was old school. I think he's probably passed on now. And the first time he encountered the 460 Weatherby, he was absolutely horrified. He just thought it was the most. And he challenged the guy that was one of your fellow countrymen arrived with a scope 460 Weatherby, and he said, "I bet you I can shoot at 25 yards. I can shoot a better group with my First World War 9mm Luger pistol than you can with your 460 Weatherby." And the guy said, "No, that's ridiculous. I've got this rifle, got a scope on it." So there's only one condition with this competition. The group size is determined by the magazine capacity of the 9mm Luger, which I think they had 7 or 8 shots. And he said, and even to make it a better, more fair of a challenge, I will shoot my Luger single-handed in like target pistol style. So he blasts off a reasonable group with his 9mm, and this poor old guy now with his 460 Weatherby, he said, well, the first 2 shots were pretty close together, but after that he said my group with my 9mm was measured in inches. He said the 7 shots of this guy with his 460 Weatherby was measured in feet. He said, can you imagine shooting like, I think it was 7 or 8 shots? They were just standing shooting. They wasn't off a rest or anything like that. He had to stand and shoot at a target at 25 meters. And the guy said, I can shoot a better group with my 9mm pistol than you can shoot with your 460 Weatherby, your scope 460 Weatherby. That always amused me because I know the recoil, what that recoil is like, and then you can develop a flinch very quickly when you're under those conditions.
Well, similar to the case with the 416 Weatherby, also uses a 26-inch barrel with a 2-inch muzzle brake on the end of it, so it's a very long rifle. The Weatherby, what rifle is this? Weatherby Mark V Deluxe, available in both 416 and 460 Weatherby. Comes from the factory slick, 8.25 pounds, so it's just a little bit heavier than the Ruger guide gun. So you put a scope and whatnot on it. It's 9.5, 9.75 pounds, something like that. You may not even be hitting 10 pounds with it. But yeah,
I should imagine that recoil's well over 100 foot-pounds. I mean, but it's the duration of the force. I mean, that's what it is. It's a 500 grain bullet doing 2.6. Is that right? The ballistics?
Let me look back at my notes here. Yes, 500 grain bullet at 2,600 feet per second.
No, thank you. If you gave me one, I would say, I'll not name on my wall, but I wouldn't want it.
Yeah, you and I have talked about this before. In these situations, I don't know what benefit that extra velocity is getting you. You're shooting a buffalo at 100 yards. You put that bullet in the exact right spot, and if it's going 300 feet per second faster than a 4.58 Win Mag or 4.58 lot, actually. Is it going to kill that buffalo or that elephant more, quicker or more effectively? Maybe. But I don't know. It's hard to quantify, but it's certainly, you have that problem like you've mentioned with the shot placement, with it. And it's challenging. I know this is the internet and everyone handles recoil really well and all that, and all the other guys are wimps. But
yeah, I don't know. No, I was just, what would worry me is the bullet coming out the other side, and as I said with that 416, whether he shoot it, he hit another two, but you don't even know they're there.
My Hornady reloading handbook is saying that with the 460 Weatherby, you can push a 500 grain bullet 2550 with 124 grains of powder. So let's see what how much recoil that's gonna give us. Or with the 10-pound rifle, it's 113 foot-pounds of recoil, free recoil.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
But and then you shoot that off. Probably out if you're standing. You sit on the bench and shoot that. That's what breaks your collarbone and dislocates. I mean, it detaches your retina, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so that's enough out of that one. One last cartridge to talk about today: the old legendary 470 Nitro Express. So we touched on it earlier. Real popular double rifle cartridge. 1907, Joseph Lang developed it, derived from a 500 Nitro. We said probably most popular cartridge used in double rifles today. Got that same 500 grain bullet at 2,150 feet per second. Now, it does have that lower sectional density, though, because it's a 4.75 caliber, so .317 sectional density. But it seems to be one of those cartridges also just seems to really work over there.
It definitely does, because it's very popular with the PHs, because it's a really good stopping cartridge, because the frontal surface area of a bullet that's 0.475 of an inch is greater than the frontal surface area of a bullet that's 0.458 of an inch. So from a PH's perspective, I think it's a wonderful cartridge, and it's very popular. And it's easy to get ammo for it, and you'll find ammo for it in most safari camps. A lot of guys, and for buffalo, a lot of guys like to come out and hunt a buffalo with their 470 double, and man, it is an effective combination on buffalo. But as I said before, I believe at really close range with the wrong type of bullet, if a really big bull elephant with the head, I would like it to have a little bit more sectional density. That's my personal opinion. But then again, with this new modern bullet designs like the Woodley Hydro, which seems to give fantastic penetration, or this flat nose solid like a cutting edge bullet, or the Zombo, the South African flat nose bullet, I do believe that bullets you do get enough penetration. I certainly wouldn't like to use that combination with a bullet like a Woodley full metal jacket, or even some old Kylock shaped bullets with lots of ogive, because we know now that the flatter the nose of the bullets, the better it penetrates. And with a double rifle, I mean, you could have a really flat nose, and there's no feeding issues, like you sometimes get with really flat nose solids in some bolt action rifles. So I think with the right bullet choice, it's a very effective combination.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, super popular. I mean, that's what John Sharp had in his real famous photo. Every PH I personally know that uses a double has a 470. Phil Macero, noted fan of it. Like you said, everybody makes ammo for it. Every double rifle company makes rifles in it. They probably made the Ruger #1 in this cartridge too. Let me look here.
But if the truth be told, the PHs that specialize in elephant hunting, the guys that are specialist elephant hunting, most of them prefer the 500 Nitro Express. Just a slightly larger caliber, slightly heavier 570 grain bullet. Like my friend Buzz Charlton, his carry rifle is a Heim 500 Nitro Express. And I think I spoke on some of those other, my game ranger friend that in the Kruger National Park that has the 450 Nitro Express. He prefers that over, I think he might have get a 470. He said, no, the 450, shooting the same bullet weight with a better sectional density, is a better penetrator than the 470, which that makes perfect sense to me. But then again, he's almost has a hunting situation rather than a PHing situation. Mm-hmm. So I think for a PH, the 470 is a really good choice. But I think if you wanted to go specifically hunt an elephant with a double with a 500 grain bullet, my preference would be to use the 450 Nitro Express rather than the 470. And that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And just for reference for the listener, that 500 Nitro is giving you 5,800 foot-pounds of muzzle energy versus quote unquote only 5,100 for the 470. But that's the difference between hunting buffalo and hunting elephant, isn't it?
Very much so. The elephants are hunted at very much closer range than buffalo. 50 meters is a pretty average shot at a buffalo, but 50 meters in elephant is a really long shot. So the situation changes completely.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is just about every single mainstream 40 caliber cartridge that we've talked about, unless you can think of any that we missed.
No, I think we've been at this for an hour and a half. I think we've just about covered everything. And it's a wonderful topic, wonderful calibers that really work. I think we've covered that pretty comprehensively, John.
All right. Well, good deal, Kevin. Well, anything else you want to wrap up with tonight before we say goodnight?
No, I think that's about it. Feels like it's time for a scotch now.
Now, as we wrap up this episode, please do me a big favor. Hit that subscribe or follow button in your podcast app if you enjoyed this episode. And please leave me a rating and or a review for the show as well if you haven't already done so. Next, visit thebiggamehuntingblog.com/Kevin. Make sure you pick up a copy of Kevin's books like The Perfect Shot 2 and or It Shouldn't Happen. Now, in that vein, Kevin has joined me for well over a dozen episodes of the Big Game Hunting Podcast, talking about all sorts of stuff: buffalo hunting, elephant conservation, leopard and lion hunting, bullets and rifles for hunting Africa, all that kind of stuff. If you like this episode, I'm sure you will enjoy those other interviews too, especially if you're kind of new to the show. To make things easier, I have included links to all of my interviews with Kevin in the show notes. So check out that list and make sure you listen to the ones that you haven't listened to yet. Kevin and I also talked at length about the horrific muzzle blast of some of these cartridges when used in rifles with muzzle brakes. There really is no excuse not to wear ear protection while hunting and shooting these days. That is especially true if you are using a rifle with a brake, or if you're hunting with someone that has a rifle wearing a brake. Now, I've used a lot of hearing protection models over the years, but the Axel X-Cores are my favorite ear protection for hunting right now. They're comfortable to wear for hours at a time, sound quality is great, and they are cordless. They're basically like having Apple AirPods that also provide ear protection and hearing enhancement. Bottom line, these X-Cores are the only ear protection I'd feel comfortable wearing when trailing a Cape buffalo in the thick bushveld, where your life depends on having all of your senses working at 100%. As a matter of fact, I've done exactly that with the X-Cores, and I was thrilled with how well they performed. Do yourself a favor, get some for yourself. Click the link in the show notes or go to thebiggamehuntingblog.com/earbuds to get the best available pricing on them. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.